Between these two cross narratives, is history itself becoming a political football between our two leading political partners?
After the Congress party's stellar victory in Karnataka, the communal battle lines continue to deepen in the state. As the new government plans to undo what it calls the BJP saffron agenda. After the furor over anti-cow slaughter laws, the Congress turns its attention to school textbooks, namely lessons on RSS founder Keshav Baliram Hedgewar. The Congress has accused the BJP of ideological corruption, calling the RSS founder a coward who deserves no pedestal in history.
BJP are so corrupt in their mind, which they wanted to infuse in the system of studies, which we are against it.
ಹೆಡ್ಗೇವಾರು ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಹೋರಾಟಗಾರರು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಎಲ್ಲಾದರೂ ಸಾಬೀತು ಮಾಡಲಿ. ಈ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಬ್ರಿಟಿಷರ ಕ್ಷಮಾಪಣೆ ಕೋರಿದಂತ ಈ ನಕಲಿ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಹೋರಾಟಗಾರರಿಗೆ ಅವರು ಮಾನ್ಯತೆ ನೀಡದಿದ್ರೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಯಾರು ಹೇಳಿಕೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
What the BJP has done is try to infuse their ideological issues into textbooks.
The BJP has accused the Congress of vendetta politics, claiming the government is waging a cultural war on Hindus by sidelining Sangh icons in India's freedom struggle.
This is not an astonishing thing. When Siddaramaiah became the chief minister, every time chief minister takes his total administration is vendetta. Not only regarding education. You can see everything.
It is recorded history that Hedgewar campaigned against British rule in India and was imprisoned multiple times for sedition. He campaigned for independence under the banner of Hindu nationalism and even joined the Congress in 1919. But he quit the party in 1923 after opposing Mahatma Gandhi's policy of launching the non-cooperation movement with the plank of Khilafat to restore the caliphate in Turkey. He then formed the RSS in 1925.
RSS देशवासियों को दिल में है, हृदय में है, वो हटा नहीं सकता. सिलेबस से हटा सकता है. वो जो लोग सत्ता में है उसके वजह से सिलेबस से हटा सकता है, बट दिल से हटा नहीं सकता.
So are the Congress party's charges against the RSS founder rooted in fact? Who is twisting history for the sake of politics?
I want to first go across to BJP MLA, former minister, in fact, former minister of higher education, Dr. Ashwath Narayan, who is now joining us. The government now saying, Dr. Narayan, that they're going to have a rethink on these textbooks, particularly the chapters that are there on Dr. KB Hedgewar, the founder of the RSS. The Congress government claims that Dr. Hedgewar was not a freedom fighter and that this chapter in this particular history textbook is for freedom fighters. So why should he be featured? Because he never fought in the independence movement.
Congress party is not a party to certify who is a freedom fighter. Dr. Hedgewar is a freedom fighter. It is a very well-known fact. He has fought for the freedom of our country. And he is a true nationalist, a true patriot, who was responsible and given an immense contribution for the nation building. In the process of nation building with a lot of diversity, in languages, in culture, in religion, in traditions. With all these challenges, RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangha, has contributed immensely for the nation building, and the founder, our Hedgewar, has given immense contribution. And we need to respect, we need to know about Dr. Hedgewar. And this kind of hatred politics by Congress really condemnable. People would like to know more about Hedgewar. They are more, this Congress party is always into divisive politics, hatred politics. They always create confusion among the people. They come out with biased statements, biased versions. So I condemn their complete approach. Removing Dr. Hedgewar's lesson from the textbook is really condemnable, and Congress party has shown its true colors.
But Dr. Ashwath Narayan, what the Congress, what the current state government is saying is that it is not them who's tinkering with history textbooks. It's actually the BJP that did that. When you were in power, you dropped chapters on Tipu, you included chapters on Savarkar, Hedgewar, that you are the ones who are actually changing history textbooks. You are putting up a revised version of history or a revisionist version of history. What the Congress is saying is that they are only correcting it to back to what it used to be before?
What should have been in the textbook, it was not there. The leftists, they have been guided by the leftists. They have time and again, they want to know more about the Mughals. They want to know about those invaders, not about the people who have built this country in this century. The people who have contributed and whom you have seen in the present modern history, we need to know about them. It is about the invaders. They always talk about the invaders. Always Gulamgiri, Gulamgiri, the Gulamgiri of the Congress. They are trying to reflect the Gulamgiri. They are Gulams. They believe in Gulamgiri, and they again want our children, our students to read about this invaders and all the Mughals and all other people who have worked, who have looted our country.
All right, Dr. Ashwath Narayan, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. That's the former Higher Education Minister of the state of Karnataka. I want to open this up to our panelists now. Professor Rakesh Sinha is Rajya Sabha Member of Parliament of the BJP. Aishwarya Mahadev, spokesperson of the Congress Party. Sangeet Ragi, RSS thinker and professor, will be joining us in a moment. And also Rashid Kidwai, senior journalist, is on the broadcast. Rakesh Sinha, let me start with you. What the Congress is claiming is that Dr. Hedgewar had a serious sort of fallout with Mahatma Gandhi and the independence movement. To call him a freedom fighter would be a stretch of the imagination, and therefore his chapter in the history textbooks of Karnataka is being dropped.
Such a statement is an annihilation of the history. Those who don't understand the freedom movement, they don't know Dr. Hedgewar, they are claiming about the Dr. Hedgewar. I am a biographer. I wrote biography of Dr. Hedgewar that has been published in many languages. I am counting 3 important things about Dr. Hedgewar. When he was a medical student in Kolkata, he was part of the revolutionary movement in Bengal, and that is available in the archival documents. Congress should go in the National Archive and search the document about Dr. Hedgewar's role in the revolutionary movement in Bengal. He was closer to many revolutionaries in Bengal. When he came in Nagpur, he was organizing the revolutionary movement. But most important thing is that during the non-cooperation movement, he led the non-cooperation movement. He was the secretary of the non-cooperation board in Nagpur. This is the non-cooperation board in Nagpur. He, along with Dr. Cholkar and Samullah Khan, this trio led the movement in Nagpur that revitalized the non-cooperation movement. Most important thing is that time the supporters of Lokmanya Tilak, they were not enthusiastic about the non-cooperation movement. Dr. Hedgewar separated himself from that stream and led that movement. He formed the Nagpur National Union. This Nagpur National Union is the first organization in the country which had sent a resolution to the Congress, special session of the Congress, that Congress should demand the complete independence. Later on in 1930s, when the civil disobedience movement started, he abandoned the position of the RSS chief as a Sarsangachalak. He led the movement, and archival that is record categorically states that. Just I'm ending with it. Just give me 20 seconds. Categorically mentioned that it was due to participation of Dr. Hedgewar that civil disobedience movement was revitalized in Vidarbha. It was already in the cold storage. So I think that in history that there is some kind of professionalism where you have to depend on the primary sources. That primary sources are the Marathi newspapers in Maharashtra and the National Archive records. If they don't, if they believe in the 10th Janpath's record, 10th Janpath's archive, then we can't help the Congress party.
Let me ask Aishwarya Mahadev this. You cannot argue that Dr. Hedgewar did not fight the British or was against the British, or that he went to jail for opposing British Raj. All of those are recorded facts of history. Just because he had a fallout with Gandhi, he did not participate in the Satyagraha, doesn't mean that he was not a freedom fighter. That's the contention of the BJP.
Good evening, Zaka. I think for the first time I've absolutely heard a lot of profound statements made by the BJP about Mr. Hedgewar. So I want to ask the BJP one thing. You have had successive governments in states for decades, including in Karnataka when Mr. Yediyurappa's first stint as CM happened. Please tell me why this profound human being was not included in the syllabus then. Why is it that all these revered RSS figures that you now sit and, sanctify and beatify, why were they not in the syllabus over the years and over the decades, even when you also had a prime minister? One, right? Because apparently there is some sudden need to reclaim and rewrite history, and it's a post-truth alternative fact sort of scenario here, Zaka, which is something that is problematic. One. Second thing is Mr. Ashwath Narayan, the way that he spoke obviously tells you the state of education in my state when he happened to be higher education minister. But a few facts for you. It is not only about Hedgewar, whose writings also in this book are something that have been contentious to the extent that several intellectuals, activists, and also writers for the Kannada textbooks have taken objection to the extent that they've asked for their writings not to be published in the textbooks of the Karnataka state. And while the country is okay with the periodic table not even being included and entire objective history not being removed, the BJP seems to be so bothered about an ideologue during which, when they were in government, they also had put on hold because of the sort of opposition to the same.
No, but Aishwarya, one second. Please answer the question that I started off by asking you. Do you have evidence to show that Hedgewar was not against the British, that he did not go to jail for fighting the British? And if he went to jail for fighting the British, then I would assume that that was for the cause of freedom.
Well, of course, there are a lot of people that went to jail, had pensions, and also wrote apology letters. And apparently, when they were in jail, had bulbuls flying out of their window that was showing them Bharat Mata and all of Hindustan. So there's a lot of contention there. But Zaka, the objective point is not that. The objective point is to sit and sanctify one individual at the cost of a Baswana, at the cost of Ambedkar, at the cost of reformative movements in Karnataka and the secular credentials to give you a colored sort of history, where entire portions of dynasties in Karnataka have been removed, entire portions of caste struggle have been removed. That is what the problem is. Because objectively, people may believe writing mercy petitions is a form of patriotism, while objectively some people may think it's an absolute act of cowardice.
In April of 1930, I just want to bring this to our viewers' notice, and I'll go to Sangeet Ragi and Rashid Gujrai after that. In April of 1930, Mahatma Gandhi, of course, gave the call for Satyagraha, a peaceful, non-violent means of claiming independence from the British. He launched the Salt Satyagraha, the famous Salt Satyagraha, and the Dandi Yatra, the Dandi March, as it were, in April of 1930. Dr. Hedgewar at that time said that the RSS will not be taking part in the Satyagraha, but he had given individuals permission to join the Dandi Yatra. He sent information everywhere that the Sangh will not participate in the Satyagraha. However, those wishing to participate individually were not prohibited. This seems to be the biggest bone of contention, Sangeet Ragi, as to why Hedgewar was not mentioned in the list of freedom fighters or in the chapter of freedom fighters in the history textbooks of Karnataka.
Jaka, I think that there were several strands of, freedom movement. There were several seats in the freedom movement. And even the Hedgewar was one of them. Just now, the spokesperson of the Congress party said that he cannot be projected at the cost of Ambedkar. I don't know any textbook in the history where Ambedkar has been projected or Ambedkar has been mentioned as a freedom fighter who participated in the freedom movement. But his contribution was immense in the sense that he continued for fighting for the just cause of Dalits, that time, the depressed classes. And the communists, they also had a share in the freedom movement, despite the fact that they collaborated with the British, they collaborated with the other forces, external forces. I think that, there is iconography of a nation. And unfortunately, Congress has hegemonized the iconography of the nation in name of one family or a couple of heroes. There are thousands and thousands, millions and millions of the heroes which have been denied their space in the textbook of history. It is only the dominant history which have been, written in last 70 years from the establishment that has taken roots in this country. But the matter of fact is that there were several strands, there were several sets of freedom movement.
No, but Sangeet Ragi, the contention by the Congress is that the leading lights of the freedom movement, from Gandhi to Nehru to Ambedkar to even Subhash Chandra Bose, they were all part of the Indian National Congress. That is their contention.
Jaka, Dr. Ambedkar was never part of the Congress, number one. Number two, Ambedkar didn't participate in any of the freedom movements, and yet nobody has the courage to say anything against Dr. Ambedkar, because Ambedkar is a political icon. If you spell out even a single word against him, you have to pay the price in terms of the vote. But since Dr. Hedgewar,
Zaka, they cut down chapters of Ambedkar in Karnataka textbooks at the cost of letting Chakravarti, Sulibele and people like chapters of
One second, Aishwarya, one second. Let him finish. One second. Aishwarya, one second. Let him finish, please. Thank you.
That is extremely
let him finish, please. Thank you. Thank you, Sangeet Ragi.
Yeah, but Jaka, just because Savarkar talked about Hindu nationalism, Savarkar talked about Hindutva, Dr. Hedgewar talked about consolidation of Hindus in light of threats coming from radical political Islam. He knew that the ideology of Hindutva is the cementing force, which can, even Gandhi thought along that line. Yes, on the Hindu-Muslim question, Gandhi and RSS had, polarized differences, but except on Hindu-Muslim relations, Gandhi and RSS conversed on probably all the issues, whether it was Swadeshi, it was a language question, it was an untouchability question, it was critique of modernity and Western civilization, whether it was a religious conversion. So Gandhi, except on the Hindu-Muslim relations, where I think that the RSS proved right and Gandhi proved wrong as far as understanding of political Islam is concerned.
Right.
But unfortunately, the space which the Hindu right should have been given in the history book
Rashid Kidwai, again, the reason for why the Congress believes that Hedgewar was not a participant in the freedom movement is because he took part in the civil disobedience movement of 1930 in an individual capacity, not as an RSS member. His concern was to keep the RSS out of the political arena. In fact, according to his biography, when Gandhi launched the Salt Satyagraha, I said this in 1930, he sent out word to everyone in the RSS that you can take part in the Satyagraha in an individual capacity, but not as members of the RSS. Is that a debarment from being considered as a freedom fighter? Because, like I said, there is evidence to show that he went to jail multiple times taking on the British.
So, Zaka, I'm glad that, the RSS ideologues and supporters and sympathizers are having this kind of political approach towards history instead of just politicizing or weaponizing it. You remember some time ago when Lal Krishna Advani made a mention about Muhammad Ali Jinnah and his period of Rana Day and Gokhale, etc. There was a huge outrage in the RSS and in the BJP, and Mr. L.K. Advani paid a heavy price. The problem is that BJP doesn't like to be paid in the same coin. They try to, constantly tweak this kind of, history in Rajasthan at federal level. You look at, the Mughal chapters related to Mughals are being erased. There's a whole politicization and weaponization of history. And the Congress is not falling behind. Congress is also doing a thing or two as per its convenience. So this is a battle of ideology, and political parties are twisting it. History is far too serious a subject, to be left to the politicians. The BJP is, that they pick and choose. So they have one yardstick on Hedgewar and another one on Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and for that matter, L.K. Advani.
Okay. Let me come back to Professor Rakesh Sinha. So I come back to the question that I started with. If it is the BJP that changed the history textbooks first when they were in power in the previous BJP government in Karnataka, the Congress's claim is that they are only reverting to how history should have been and was before the BJP decided to tinker with it by dropping chapters on Tipu Sultan, by bringing in Savarkar, by bringing in Hedgewar and so on. They are just correcting it to how it used to be for the last 60 years. Okay,
coming to that question, I'm answering the earlier question you raised, that why did Hedgewar say that RSS members should participate on individual capacity? Hedgewar was one of the thinkers and the activists who believed that in freedom movement, anti-imperialist movement, there should not be two flags, there should not be two banners, there should not be two leadership. It would be divisive. That's why he participated. He gave a clarion call to the Swayamsevak to participate in individual capacity. Otherwise, they should have given with the RSS banner, RSS name, and RSS leadership. And Dr. Hedgewar denied such thing. One important thing that Hedgewar's trial is very important, significant event that represents the grassroots patriotism and grassroots anti-liberation movement. During his trial, during the non-cooperation movement, he himself faced the judges and he questioned the very locus standi of the judges that you can't become a judge in a country where you are forcibly ruling the country, forcibly occupied the country. And the judgment was that the award of punishment, it stated that your defense is more seditious than your original crime. This is the patriotism of Dr. Hedgewar. As far Gandhi and Hedgewar is concerned, in 1934, it was Mahatma Gandhi who desired to see Dr. Hedgewar seeing the discipline of the RSS. He didn't know that time about the RSS. He was staying at Jamna Lal Bajaj residence in Wardha. Then he desired to meet Hedgewar. He went to the RSS camp. That day Hedgewar was not there. Later on, Hedgewar went to meet him. And Hedgewar, Gandhi was so impressed by Dr. Hedgewar and RSS campaign against untouchability, his theory and action. Later on, before his death, before his assassination, in Delhi, 16 September 1947, Gandhi went to participate in the RSS camp. He addressed the RSS Swayamsevaks. These are all available in the collective works of Gandhi.
No, but Professor Sinha, the fundamental.
Rashid was an RSS sympathizer.
Yeah.
What is this line of argument?
No.
This is cherry picking.
What is?
They will say that Mr. Pranab Mukherjee was an RSS sympathizer.
No, just because he went to the RSS headquarters. Is that what you're saying, Rashid?
No, absolutely.
No. One second. There is a fundamental point which needs to be emphasized, and that is the reason why Dr. Hedgewar did not support the Satyagraha movement as an organization, as RSS the organization. In addition to what Professor Sinha said, was I think there was a fundamental difference in the idea of freedom, both for the RSS and Mr. Hedgewar, and of course for Mahatma Gandhi, which is that for Mr. Hedgewar and the RSS, India was an ancient civilization, a 5,000-year-old civilization where you had for 800 or 1,000 years foreign rule, first by the Mughals and then by the British. So the idea of independence was reclaiming a land which was an ancient Hindu civilization, whereas for Gandhi and Nehru and the rest of the Congress, it was for everyone, that the Muslims were also part of this land and the Christians were also part of this land, and that was the fundamental difference in the idea of freedom. Sangeet Ragi.
Jaka, on 4th May 1940, Gandhi is writing in Harijan, in any case, a Muslim rule in India will be preferable to me than the British one. Now think of Sir Syed Ahmad and Jinnah both said on so many occasions that this was the land which was ruled earlier by the Muslims, and when the British leave, the power should be transferred to the Muslims. Now remember, how could they expect Savarkar to support Gandhi on Quit India movement when Gandhi himself is writing in Harijan that a Muslim rule in India is preferable to, whereas Savarkar was fighting for the Hindu consolidation. Savarkar was working towards a Hindu consolidation, and Savarkar proved right. Jinnah divided the country. Muslims supported not for divided indivisible India. Muslims supported the idea of Pakistan.
No. One second. No. I beg to differ there. Even when that happened, there were more Indian Muslims who stayed back in this land than those who migrated. I don't think so. I don't think that is correct. There were more Muslims who stayed back in India than those who. No, I'm not balancing. It's a recorded fact. But anyway, this is not. One second. I'm very clear about certain recorded facts of history to suggest that more Muslims went away from India into Pakistan in 1947 when Pakistan was created, I don't think is accurate. Things may have changed thereafter. But the point is not. The debate that we're having is about whether Hedgewar was a freedom fighter or not. Now, let me ask Aishwarya Mahadev, and then I'll give the final word to Rashid as well. Aishwarya Mahadev, the point is you are picking and choosing only freedom fighters of a movement or a political orientation because it suits you. You are unwilling to consider that people like Savarkar or Hedgewar were also fighting for the same thing, which is independence from the British, but their means of getting there or their idea of getting there was different. That doesn't mean that they were any less freedom fighters.
Zaka, before I answer that, I think RSS and thinkers seem to be quite oxymoronic as a term coming right now. And for your show to allow people to say the things that he has been saying is insulting to everybody on this panel. But let me answer what you're saying. I believe that this was not only, first of all, when the first textbook correction happened, let's bring this back because there's a lot of history people can talk about here and a lot of, I'm sure their best-selling books can put that out. It shouldn't be on prime time right now. But Zaka, the fact still remains that in Karnataka over the years, the BJP has also been in power. Never once have they decided to insert these new freedom fighters. It is a new exercise that started, one, without a constitutional mandate because the Rohit Chakratita committee was constituted without a necessity from experts in school education to change it. One. Second thing is, it was not only the Congress that saw the errors, it was glaring instances of miswriting and misconceptions. I'm sorry, I'm sure other people believe they know history better, especially the RSS thinker whose party didn't even believe in the tricolor, rather the Bhagavad Dwaja. But the fact remains that even today, the thinkers refuse to have their works in our textbooks and asked for it to be corrected. These are not political leaning. These are institutions. These are organizations in themselves and intellectuals that wanted this. If they believe objectively that post-truth alternative fact, they want to add new freedom fighters, I believe it is not going to happen in a state like Karnataka, and that is the be-all and end-all of this matter. We do not need diatribes on who is a nationalist. We do not need diatribes on the independence struggle, and we do not definitely need diatribes about anybody's patriotism or even dialogues about the father of the constitution, Mr. Ambedkar, whether he was part of the Congress or not. And I think it's very insulting that you come on prime time to try and tell the viewers otherwise.
Okay.
I'm sure you can keep it to your books. I'm sure you have a section of people that have the misfortune of buying it, but you will not have your reign over Karnataka and its secular education.
I just want to, again, because this was brought up in the conversation, there were 35 million Muslims who stayed back in India at the time of partition. So I just want to put that on record. Rashid Kidwai, final word.
Yeah. So Zaka, first of all, I thank you for presenting that fact. Second thing was the voting right. 84% people did not have voting rights. So in terms of Muslim community, it was only the zamindars or even the wealthy section people, income taxpayers and all who had a voting right. And the mandate also of 37 and all gave a very different kind of verdict. Now coming to Zaka, history is far too serious. History can be very unpleasant for but one particular person or another. But we need to have a professional and a consistent approach. It's very unfortunate that a boy or girl is studying in 4th standard, read something else. By the time he or she reaches in 9th, has some other, kind of textbook, some other interpretation of history. And by the time he or she goes in college, there is a different history. I think we must, as a mature country and civilization, we must put an end to it. And it cannot, as I said, history cannot be left to the whims and fancies of political parties and individuals who have a very jaundiced view of history.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. We'll see how the story plays out.
Jaka, there is nothing like objective history.
Okay.
Jaka, there is nothing
just like there is no objective journalism.
Exactly what you want.
Just like there is no objective journalism. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much to all our guests. I'm completely out of time, but we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, there's an exclusive conversation with international relations expert and somebody who's got a very keen eye on how this Russia-Ukraine war is playing out. John Mearsheimer is the head of Department of Political Science at the University of Chicago. He will be joining me right on the other side to talk about the current global power plays, particularly now with this counter-offensive by Ukraine. How is this war going to play itself out over the summer months? Who has the advantage? Is it Russia or Ukraine? And how is it likely to end? That conversation right on the other side.
the system did not fail. There was either intentfully or without intent some sort of interference with the system.
I was given to understand that some maintenance work was indeed going on there.
The fact that it's been a month and a half since these protests started, we've had a second 6-hour-long meeting between the sports minister and the protesting wrestlers. Why should they believe and why should the people believe that by the 15th there will be some resolution?
Yet another fresh face-off, and multiple media reports point to not just fortifications but significant build-up on the other side of the line of actual control that is occupied by China. Bhutan airfield means a J-16 can now land within 400 kilometers of Leh and Srinagar. Is this on expected lines, or should we be really worried that the conflict is going to escalate, sir?
Guests will be joining us in a moment. I want to first go across to the chairperson of the National Commission for Women, Rekha Sharma. Thank you very much, ma'am, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. We are seeing this again and again, whether it was Aftab and Shraddha here in Delhi, whether it is this Manoj Sani and Saraswati Vaidya in Mumbai. We are seeing the kind of depravity in behavior, almost like these are not human beings. This is almost like animal-like behavior. Why are we seeing this extreme depravity in crimes against women of late?
I think somehow morally and socially we are going down day by day, especially the thinking of men that they can get away with these kinds of murders, and when the people who have committed these kinds of crimes don't get punished, then also I think they think that they can go scot-free after committing crimes. And somehow I think how we should raise our sons, that we need to think, the families need to think that morally how we should raise our sons and how society can change the way of thinking of our boys, men.
Now, in such kind of relationships where there is an abusive partner, a sociopath or a psychopath, and these women are living for 3, 5, sometimes even 10 years, how could they not know? How could they not figure out that their partner is a psychopath?
Jaka, yes, they do know, but there is a battered wife syndrome also, that women also get used to these kinds of behavior of their partner, and that is the syndrome, and they really need counseling from a psychologist if they are going through it, because they are used to. These men, what they do is, when they misbehave with the woman, the second time they will they will pardon themselves, they will say sorry, and they will again shower them with gifts and love them, and they take them back. Women take them. That is called battered wife syndrome. And many of our girls, even in Shraddha's case, we have seen that she was going through tough time with that boy, but still she was living with that person. It was because of that. They don't know that they have to go to a counselor, somebody and ask help. They don't know how to walk out of that relationship when they are beaten up, or they are harassed mentally or physically.
One other thing that we've noticed, ma'am, is that oftentimes these kinds of victims of such harsh abuse, they are secluded away from their family, from their friends. They have no support system of any kind. What are the signs that one needs to pick up if somebody happens to be living in an abusive relationship, there is physical violence and so on? What should one look out for?
In every relationship, it is very, very important that a person has support system, whether from family or friends, and share their problems to the persons they are close to. But in Indian society, especially women don't share their problems outside outside a relationship. They think that they have to protect that relationship from outside world, and even if that is abusive relationship, they don't share. So first thing is, if you are feeling that somebody is abusing you, even verbally, you should walk out of this and share it with your friends. It is very important because they will give you a suggestion, and family also need to support their children.
All right.
If they are supporting, these kinds of things will not happen. Earlier also I said, and many people disagreed with me, which is okay. But families need to support their children, even if they are having a live-in relationship. In that way, I think they will be able to share if they are going through any problem.
Okay, Rekha Sharma, we'll leave it at that. We'll see how this story plays out. This is, of course, the latest in a series of very, very violent crimes, almost inhuman crimes, where not only is the victim, the woman in these cases, murdered, but also the body is disposed of in the most brutal of fashions.
The murder of Shraddha Walker sent shockwaves across the nation. Her partner Aftab murdered and then dismembered her body, dumping her parts in a nearby forest. Now, a similar horror has emerged from the Maximum City, where a 56-year-old man has been arrested for allegedly murdering his live-in partner and chopping her body into pieces.
There was a tree cutter, there was a saw cutter that was present inside the hall as well as the bedroom. There was a polythene, there was a black plastic which was put on the bed. Her hair were cut and kept there. There were parts of her leg which were being found by the cops.
इन्वेस्टिगेशन में ऐसा रिवील हो चुका था कि एक कपल था, लिव इन रिलेशन में रह रहा था उधर. उनका आइडेंटिफिकेशन हो चुका है. अक्यूज्ड को भी अरेस्ट किया गया. जो डेड बॉडी के पीसेस मिले वो एनालिसिस के लिए हमने जेजे हॉस्पिटल में भेजे हैं.
All right, it's been over a year now since this war in Ukraine began. By most estimates, there are the casualty count running into tens of thousands. And what seems to be interesting is there doesn't seem to be an end in sight, both from the Ukrainian side or from the Russian side. To talk about how this conflict may progress over the summer months, particularly because there is some chatter about a Ukrainian counter-offensive, a Russian offensive, so on and so forth. And of course, the stories that we've been hearing in the days leading up to today. Joining us now is one of the foremost and most erudite foreign policy scholars in the world, and somebody who has a very keen eye on the trajectory of this war and how it's been progressing from even before it began. Professor John Mearsheimer is the head of Department of Political Science at the University of Chicago. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor.
My pleasure to be here.
So let's start with where we are today. It's been over a year since this war began. Were you expecting it to last this long? And what is your assessment of where things stand today?
Well, I figured that it would be a long war. And of course, it's proven to be a long war, given that it's gone on now for well over a year. I think basically what happened was that in 2022, the Ukrainians did quite well for themselves. And there was a lot of optimism in the West that the Ukrainians would ultimately capture all of the territory that they had lost and deliver a significant defeat to the Russians. But I think things have changed in 2023, largely as a result of the Russians mobilizing all sorts of forces, and also the fact that the Russians, because of their advantage in artillery, have killed many more Ukrainians than Ukrainians have killed Russians. So the balance, in a very important way, in 2023 has shifted towards the Russians. And I think at this particular juncture, and I think it's true moving forward, I think the Russians have a significant advantage over the The
last time we spoke, which was a few months ago, you said the trajectory of this war is going in the way of the Korean War or the Russia-Georgia conflict, which, as you described it, were frozen conflicts. Is there anything that's happened in the last few weeks and months that leads you to believe that this is not going the way of a frozen conflict?
No, I think that whether or not you have a frozen conflict or a meaningful peace settlement is a function of whether or not there is a deal that can be worked out between the two sides. And I've long argued that there is no meaningful peace agreement that the two sides would agree to. And there are two thorny issues, two intractable issues, to be honest, that are at play here. One is the territorial issue, and the other is the issue of neutrality. With regard to territory, for understandable reasons, the Ukrainians want all their territory back. But the Russians have already annexed the Crimea and 4 Ukrainian oblasts, and they have made it unequivocally clear that they're not giving that territory back. So there's no resolution of the territorial problem. Then there's the issue of neutrality. Again, for understandable reasons, the Ukrainians want a security guarantee. And the only country or institution that can give them that security guarantee is NATO. But the Russians insist that Ukraine has to be neutral and has to cut its ties with NATO. Again, how do you square that circle? And the answer is you don't. So in effect, there's no deal here. You can't have a meaningful peace agreement, and the best you can hope for is a frozen conflict.
So I want to talk a little bit about this Ukrainian counteroffensive that's being talked about. Zelensky has been going around world capitals talking about how the counteroffensive has already started. This chatter of equipping the Ukrainians with F-16 fighter jets. How do you see this conflict, particularly as we get into the summer months? And this was the time that Ukraine sort of pushed back last year as well, same time last year. How do you see it playing out over the next, let's say, 4 or 5 months?
Well, there's no question that the Ukrainian government is under tremendous pressure from the West to launch a counteroffensive and to demonstrate that it has significant offensive capability and that there's some reasonable chance that they can take back that territory from the Russians that they have lost. The Ukrainians, however, understand, given what's happened on the battlefield in recent months, and given the shift in the balance of power that's taken place in favor of the Russians, that it would be very foolish to launch a major offensive now. Because once the Ukrainian forces come up out of their trenches, up out of the ground, and they're moving forward in the open, they're vulnerable to all of that Russian artillery and that Russian air power. And the Russians will inflict massive casualties on them. So what you see here is that the Ukrainians have been very hesitant to launch a major offensive against those heavily defended Russian positions. However, on Sunday, this past Sunday, the Ukrainians began to launch small-scale offensives, and they've been doing that for the past few days. The end result, however, is that the Russians have been inflicting massive casualties on them. There's a huge casualty imbalance here between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's because the firepower balance is so decisively in favor of the Russians at this point in time. So we're in a situation now where the Ukrainians are not in a position to launch an offensive like they were last year. Remember what I said at the beginning of the program. The Ukrainians were in quite good shape in 2022, but now in 2023, the balance has shifted against them. And I think that moving forward, what you're going to see is that the balance is going to continually favor the Russians, and the Russians are going to make more and more advances on the ground.
So I also want to talk about one of the things that's happened recently in the last few days, this dam that was attacked, and now we're seeing, parts of Kherson being flooded. There's chatter about how this could potentially put in danger the nuclear reactors around there. The Ukrainians, of course, have straight away blamed Russia for this blasting this dam. Russia has denied it. What does this indicate to you? Is there a sense of desperation from both sides? Because I haven't quite seen something like this, blasting a dam and putting cities under flood waters in some time.
Let me just say, I don't know who did it, and I've read extensively on the issue, and you can make an argument that there were some reasons for the Ukrainians to do it and some reasons for the Russians to do it. So through pure deduction, it's hard to say who did it or who is likely to have done it. I don't see how either side gains any major military advantage from blowing up this dam. So I don't think that it's going to have much effect on the course of the battle. But what it illustrates to me is what a total disaster this war is for Ukraine. I argued before the war started that the United States and its allies should go to great lengths to prevent this war, in large part because once it started, the Russians would go to great lengths to wreck Ukraine, to turn it into a dysfunctional rump state. And if you look at what's happening to Ukraine today, it's just absolutely horrible. It's an utter disaster. And it just gets worse and worse as the war escalates. And by the way, the dam coming unglued is evidence of escalation at play. We should expect more events of this sort moving forward. But as to who did it and why they did it, it's just not clear at all.
I also want to talk to you a little bit about this story around the Nord Stream pipelines, which were blasted away last year. Now there is new reporting from the Washington Post, which seems to suggest that the Biden administration, through its intelligence agencies, was in the loop that pro-Ukraine groups were going to carry this out. This is in addition to the story that came out a few months ago, which suggested that contrary to what some journalists like Mr. Seymour Hersh have been reporting, that it's not U.S. military operations groups or special operations groups that carried this out, but this was pro-Ukrainian groups who were behind that. I'm just curious to know what you think of this whole mystery around who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines.
Well, as you point out, there are really two stories that are floating around now. One is identified with Cy Hersh, and that's the argument that the Americans did it. And Cy Hersh, who talked to people on the inside, seemed to have lots of hard evidence from talking to insiders that the Americans did it. Then a number of people began to make the argument, and you saw this in news outlets in both the United States and Germany, and legitimate places like the New York Times, making the case that it was not the United States, that it was either Ukrainian groups that were operating independently of the Ukrainian government or acting in tandem with the Ukrainian government. And the Seymour Hersh response to that is that this is basically a disinformation campaign to hide the fact that the Americans did it. People on the other side say that's not true at all. The Americans didn't do it. The Ukrainians did it. Where the truth lies is very hard to say at this point in time, just like it's very hard to say who's responsible for blowing up the dam the other day. We need hard evidence to make a decisive conclusion one way or the other. And at this point, we don't have much evidence on either side. So I think we're just going to have to wait a while, maybe a long time, to figure out exactly what happened here.
So assuming that, neither side has a significant advantage to the extent that they can force an outcome in this war over the next few months, and if this war is going to continue into the 2024 US presidential cycle, what sort of domestic impact do you think that could potentially have? And it looks like it's going to be Biden on the side of the Democrats and Trump on the side of the Republicans. Will this war, this continuing war, have a fallout domestically on the presidential cycle?
Well, my guess is that what's going to happen here is that the Russians are going to make more and more gains over the next year. and that going into the 2024 election, it will look like the Russians are on the verge of some kind of victory, or maybe have achieved some kind of victory by then. And this will cause all sorts of problems for President Biden, because the Republicans will criticize him for not backing the Ukrainians with enough military force. Biden has made, in my opinion, a big mistake making the claim that the Ukrainians would win and that we would back them until they did win. Because if the Russians end up winning, or events on the battlefield play out in a way that looks like the Russians won, then Joe Biden ends up with a black eye. And this is not good going into the election. And of course, the Republicans will go to great lengths to take advantage of that situation to make it look like Biden was weak and he didn't do what was necessary to help the Ukrainians, after he said that he was going to help the Ukrainians achieve their goals on the battlefield. So I think moving forward, what's happening in Ukraine is bad news for the Biden administration.
Just the last couple of questions, just in terms of, if, as you say, Russia is going to gain further and further, and it's going to be Russia, maybe at the end of 6 months, maybe at the end of this summer, that Russia is in a better position to claim victory, or is nearer to victory than Ukraine is. How does both Ukraine and the West, America included, deal with that? Because for Ukraine, as Zelensky keeps saying, has kept saying from day one, this is almost like an existential crisis for them. If they lose this war, Ukraine as a country ceases to exist. So how do you square that? And B, for the West, that is America, its European partners, with NATO, can they brook a Russian victory?
Well, I mean, the question is, how do we get from the fighting that's now taking place to a frozen conflict? Because as I said, there's no meaningful peace agreement here. The question is, when do you get to a frozen conflict? I think your comments make it clear that just to get to a frozen conflict is going to be difficult, because the Ukrainians are going to continue to fight, and the West has a profound interest in continuing to back the Ukrainians to make sure the Russians don't win a big victory. The Russians, on the other hand, have an incentive to win a big victory. So it's hard to see this war coming to an end, which means turning into a frozen conflict anytime soon. But once it turns into a frozen conflict, it's probably not going to remain a frozen conflict for that long, again, for all the reasons that you laid out. The Ukrainians and the West will have a vested interest in building up the Ukrainian military to where it can go back on the offensive and give the Russians all sorts of problems on the battlefield, and hopefully take back more Ukrainian territory that's been lost to the Russians. So you see, getting to a frozen conflict will not be easy, and then maintaining a frozen conflict once you get there won't be easy. All of this is to say, this situation, this disastrous situation, is likely to continue for as far as the eye can see, because we have no meaningful peace agreement on the horizon.
And one final word, what is the impact of this conflict, or the fallout of this conflict, on global relations between various powers, particularly in the context of, the upcoming G20 meeting, which India is hosting? We had a joint statement in the last G20, which Indonesia had hosted. There again, negotiations went on for a number of hours, and finally they thrashed through an agreement which had a very minimal reference to Ukraine and Russia and the conflict, but nonetheless they did manage to get a joint statement. How has this conflict divided the world? Not just America and its allies on the one side, and perhaps Russia and China on the other, but even countries who don't necessarily have a stake directly in what's going on in between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, I think that there is no question that once you get outside of the West, and this would include countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, I include them in the West. Once you get outside of the West, most countries are quite sympathetic to the Russian side and not to the Western side. And this is evident in India's attitude towards the conflict. The Americans, for understandable reasons, want the Indians to join forces with the West and go after the Russians hammer and tong. The Indians are not buying that argument at all. And I think for smart reasons on the part of India. I think most Indians understand that it was the West that provoked this conflict and that siding with Ukraine and the West is not a smart policy at this point in time. So the West has this real problem that once you get outside of the West, which includes over half of the people on the planet, you find that most people in that world sympathize with Russia, not with the West. And this causes real problems. And of course, the United States will continue to put pressure on India to side with the West. But my sense is that that won't happen.
All right, Professor John Mearsheimer, as always, a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for speaking up.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
The system did not fail. There was either intentfully or without intent some sort of interference with the system.
I was given to understand that some maintenance work was indeed going on there.
The fact that it's been a month and a half since these protests started, we've had a second 6-hour-long meeting between the sports minister and the protesting wrestlers. Why should they believe and why should the people believe that by the 15th there will be some resolution?
Yet another fresh face-off, and multiple media reports point to not just fortifications but significant build-up on the other side of the line of actual control that is occupied by China. Bhutan airfield means a J-16 can now land within 400 kilometers of Leh and Srinagar. Is this on expected lines, or should we be really worried that the conflict is going to escalate, sir?
Namaskar and a very warm welcome. You're watching Vantage. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. The big story on Vantage tonight: is China planning to set up a spy base in Cuba? Havana has dismissed the media reports. The White House too has called them inaccurate. And what has Beijing done? Asked Washington to mind its own business. We'll be getting you all the details on what could be the most direct challenge yet to the continental United States. And there's more.